Hi guys, welcome to this month's webinar. This is going to be on has the government killed the buy-to-let property market? So we're going to go through exactly the changes that's been taken place and the changes that are coming up, and the implications, and obviously how it affects you. Without further ado, let's head over to the webinar. So first of all, the buy-to-let rental market. What I would say is, above all of this, above the fact that the government have tried to slow down the property market, the sole intention hasn't been to negate people that have a buy-to-let investment. The whole point of this isn't to stifle the buy-to-let market. The whole point of it is to allow first-time and second buyers to get on the ladder. So what they do is they think that actually if the buy-to-let market is, or property prices are being pushed up due to the buy-to-let market, then that's what they're stifled. However, what they've created is this vicious circle, which actually ironically has pushed prices up, which we'll come on to later. It goes back to sort of 2008, 2009 times. A lot of people remained in their properties in 2008, 2009. And the market stagnated dramatically. And what a lot of people put that to is the subprime over in America. But actually, that's a bit of a myth. In America, there was a subprime market, and there were a lot of negative equity. But the reason why people didn't move is Gordon Brown actually come out and said that he is looking to potentially stop stamp duty for a short period. So by saying you are going to potentially stop stamp duty, well, suddenly everyone doesn't buy it. They think, well, actually, if I'm going to go and buy a 300,000 house, a 500 or £1 million house, on a £1 million house, you're going to pay 80 to 90,000 stamp duty. If someone comes out and says, we're going to potentially ban stamp duty or put a limit on stamp duty, you're certainly not going to move. So that's what actually caused the stagnation. So in regards to the current market, presently, the private sector, there are a huge amount of regulation changes and tax laws, and all of these have left landlords nervous, because every time a new piece of legislation or a new tax change comes out, and it dampens the mood of the market. However, what we still say to everybody is compare it to what else you're getting. Compare it to, in the UK, a lot of people invest in ISAs, premium bonds, leave it in their savings accounts, even the stock market. You've got the stock market, which is nearing an all-time high, probably due to the fact that most countries and the Fed in particular said they're going to cut interest rates, which means cheap borrowing. Cheap borrowing means that they go and invest in the places like the stock market. Stock market goes up. So with that high, you've got to ask yourself, where else is there to put your money? However, as I say, the changes in the regulation and tax laws have left certain landlords a bit nervous about where the market is going. In the last couple of months, well, come June the 1st, actually, we saw a tenant fee ban. There was the Fit for Human Habitation Act and the CMPS schemes, named but a few. So a lot of things going on in the market. Now, what they say is that, for example, the tenant fee ban is the main one. You can't put certain charges on that tenant. So that tenant comes in. The reason why typically a tenant is renting because they can't afford to buy. So the last thing you want to go and do is cost them even more money, which, treads on them again, essentially. So they've banned certain things in terms of vetting and checking. You can only take a certain amount of deposit from them now, or a certain amount of weeks deposit. That's come in. But then you've got to ask yourself, well, letting companies, letting agents have to make their money somehow. So as a letting agent, whereas you could before charge 6 to 8% to let, and then you could then charge the tenant a little bit as well. Even for a renewal, for example, local to us, a renewal here is £180. And that's literally the letting agent doing nothing. That would mean that you renew after 12 months, and then they charge you automatically £180 just for the sake of you signing a contract. However, things like that have now been banned. So now letting agents can't make that kind of money anymore. They are obviously going to pass that on to the landlords. So landlords will then be charged, maybe 10% or sometimes even 12%. Then you've got to ask yourself, well, if landlords are making less money, they've got two options. They either put the prices up of the rent, or they duck out of the market. And with nowhere else to go, they typically just put the prices up of the rent. And of course, that goes back on the tenant. So it's this vicious circle that keeps going round. The government is also passing new regulation and increasing taxes. The one that's been muted recently is the overseas stamp duty. So they've had basic stamp duty, then they did second home stamp duty, and now they're saying overseas national stamp duty. I personally don't think that's going to come in, especially with Brexit. I think that come Brexit, I do feel that we will leave deal or no deal on the 31st of October. But I feel that regardless of that, we need to be advertising ourselves across the world as a nation who accepts foreign investment. That's going to be the key to keeping money coming in, and to start taxing overseas clients even more than we do our own UK citizens, and to put stamp duty up. I think that's the wrong way to go, and I don't think that they would go down that route. However, let's be realistic, it's a stumbling block for people entering into the market. Anyone who's looking to access the market now is obviously has to take into consideration these factors. So what are the factors, and how does it affect you? Well, the tax changes. So under the old rules, you could deduct your mortgage interest before determining your taxable profit. So if, for example, let's be really do some crude figures here, very round figures. If you earn £10,000 a year, but you pay £10,000 a year in your mortgage, actually that means you make zero profit, and therefore you have no tax to pay. But if you make £10,000 a year now, you can actually only deduct a percentage of that, and by 2020, that will be, you won't be able to deduct any of it. So that means if you make 10,000, even if your mortgage costs 10,000 interest, it means that actually they will still tax you on the £10,000 profit. So therefore, whatever your tax rate is, if this is assuming that you have it in your personal name, whether you're 20%, 40%, or even 50% tax rate payer, you will be paying tax on that particular profit. So suddenly, if you're making £10,000 a year and you've got £10,000 in costs, you're actually then going to, if you're a 20% tax rate payer, you're going to pay an extra 2,000. So actually what it's saying is that you're going to effectively lose money. So that's where the key to these properties come in, is suddenly the 2 to 3% income that worked previously now doesn't work. You've got to be making at least double what the interest is on your mortgage. Otherwise, it's just simply not worth doing. That then comes down to using a company like ourselves or a number of other companies across the UK to find out where the best rates are. That's why a lot of companies out there who just deal locally, and where people were just simply looking locally and making 2 or 3%, they could do that years ago. Now that just simply doesn't work anymore. You want to be aiming for at least 5 to 6% minimum, because obviously you're going to have 2 to 3% on your mortgage. So 5 to 6% minimum before you can say, you know what, that's worth doing. Of course, you benefit from the growth as well, but the key is the income side of things for a regular yearly income. Under the new rules, as I said, the interest rate relief is going to be cut. It's been cut 25% per year, and it's going to be phased right the way through until April 2020, where there will be no relief whatsoever. However, if you start to plan and you put these properties into a limited company, then the advantage that you'll have is that you can start to take the interest out. So again, that's worth speaking to the accountant about. You can start to think, you know what, put it in a limited company or an SPV, so special purpose vehicle, and then you can start to take the interest out that way. Again, always best to speak to an accountant in regards to that. In regards to the stamp duty, the whole reason why they introduced this initially was to slow the housing market down so people could purchase rather than having to rent. However, if you look at overseas economies, if you look at places like Germany and Spain, and you head to most cities, but let's head to the capital cities there, they are renting nations. We are becoming generation rent. The majority of people are going to, in those particular countries, rent. A lot of people don't get on the ladder till their mid-30s, and it's not unusual to have a mortgage that passes from mum and dad down to son or daughter. So that's not unusual at all. So with the stamp duty that's coming to place, that's due to slow the market down. But ironically, it hasn't. What a lot of people do is the same thing. If you've got an extra £3,000 or £4,000, £5,000 stamp duty on your buy-to-let, you typically then put the rent up. The tenant then has to pay more, which means the tenant has less money in their pocket. Less money means that they can't then get on the ladder to buy, and so the process goes on. So ironically, something that the government has tried to do has actually worked the opposite way. It is a cost that can't be avoided. A lot of people say, well, how do I avoid this cost? What can I do? Well, one way to be a little bit smarter about it is if you've got £500,000 to invest, let's say round figures, you've got £500,000, well, don't go and buy a £500,000 property. Go and buy 3 properties that are either £150,000 to £160,000 each, or a couple of properties that are 2 to 250, and then you decrease the amount of stamp duty that you're actually paying. So you are far better to buy 2 or 3 lower price properties than you are to go and buy one big £500,000–600,000 one in London. It just doesn't make sense. You're paying more stamp duty. So try and stick under that 250,000 bracket for a buy-to-let if you can. In regards to tenant fees, as I say, we mentioned earlier, the Tenants Fee Act will ensure that tenants will be able to see what's given to them. Other things that you can't do, and over the years, one thing that we get a lot of is clients coming to us and they try and break it down even more. So whilst I mentioned to you there, you may have £500,000 and split that into 1, 2, 3 properties. What a lot of people do is they have maybe £150,000 and want to split that into 3 properties. So whilst I understand where they're coming from, spread their risk, suddenly for a 50, 60,000 property, you are going to get a totally different tenant, a totally different clientele than you would if you had a £150,000 property. Now, this is a big thing, because if you've got a £50,000 property, you may have tenants which are simply on the lower income end of the scale. That's the reality. Now, on the Rightmove and Zoopla, you now cannot advertise whether you do or do not want DSS tenants in your property, so housing benefit tenants. So, for example, if you've got a cheaper property years ago, or even last year, you could turn around and say, we won't accept anyone that has housing benefit. Now that's illegal. You can't do that. So what you want to do is make sure that you get a property which outprices that. Therefore, you know what type of tenants that you want to have in your property. We say to everyone, you want young professionals or young couples in your property. They're the ones that won't be there that much, therefore less wear and tear. They take care of the property. That's what you want. If you start to go for cheaper houses outside, you will get younger families. And, let's be realistic. You get kids, hands up the walls, ruining stuff, spilling stuff. That's not what you want. That's more wear and tear. So it's all about choosing wisely at the start. In regards to what the rental can be taken, the deposits are capped at 5 weeks rent. So you can't take, whereas some people before would take 2-3 months rent, can't do that anymore. It's capped now at 5 weeks. And the tenant fee ban is set to affect both landlord and agents. Now, whilst they won't be able to pass on the costs directly, they can indirectly do this through things like, as I say, like the rent and things like the cost of keys, whereas sometimes they'll charge £20 for a set of keys. Now they might charge £100 for another set of keys. Again, things like that they're allowed to do. Now, all private landlords are now required to sign up to the CMPS, so the Client Money Protection Scheme, or you simply get fined. So this will stop rogue landlords sort of spending the money, and when it comes to checkout time, suddenly the poor tenant doesn't have the deposit back in their bank within a certain period of time. So all private landlords are now required to sign up to the CMPS scheme. It does add protection to both tenants and landlords. We say to everyone, look, in regards to our company, when we let, we simply let, and their money is segregated. That money isn't touched at all. We don't spend that whatsoever. We can't spend that. That's ring fenced, and that gets kept in a segregated account. And there are plenty of schemes that can do that. Members, as I say, need to show that their client money is kept in a separate account, and they've got obviously professional indemnity insurance. You've also got landlords who literally will just put you into absolutely anything. The Home Acts, this is to protect them. It's feared that, though, that this may encourage tenants to make fictitious claims against the landlord. So for every action, there's a reaction. And a lot of times this legislation isn't thought through, and it's created a lot more cases against landlords, which has obviously blocked up certain small claims courts. And again, it's been pretty tough. So again, there's certain acts that have been put in, but not really been thought through. Again, the way to deal with this is don't get caught up in renting your own property. It's not the way forward. It's a full-time job, and if you've got a full-time job as it is, the last thing you want is being called on a weekend or hassle, let a letting agent deal with that. Regardless of who you use, check them out, make sure they've got the right legislation behind them, and use the right letting agent. Also, you've got to have a certain threshold on an EPC certificate. You've got to pay for your EPC certificate. So all of this stuff has to be taken into account when you're about to let. It's not just the purchase of the property, it's all the certificates and the certification that comes in after the event as well. The rules are going to be extended to all tenancies in April 2020, and all existing tenancies must be brought up to this new standard. The most important thing, that's going to take place, in my opinion, is the tenant fee ban. This tenant fee ban, as I say, I think personally is going to increase rentals across the UK, especially in major city areas, and I think that's something that hasn't been thought through at all personally. Then on top of that, again, if you've got an older property and it doesn't come up to the E threshold, then you've got to start thinking about costs to that particular property. Now, things like grade 2 listed properties, there are exemptions, but as I say, on a normal property that isn't grade 2 listed, if you haven't got that E grade property, then maybe you may still have old windows in. Therefore, you've got to think, actually, is the cost of replacing all of these windows and insulation worth doing? This is why we say to everyone, new properties are the way forward. You get a 10-year guarantee with them, a 10-year certificate, and then you get the full insulation. For me, it just makes it a no-brainer, because you're not going to be anywhere close to an E on a brand new property. Holiday lets. Now, here, this is where we are maximising the most amount of income for our clients. Holiday lets have been really untouched by the government. With this type of rental, you are renting your property to 1, 2, 3, multiple people for short periods, 1, 2, 3 nights at a time. Sometimes it may be on the coastal areas where you're doing a week or two, but typically city centre, you're taking over the hotel lets. So we say to people, don't buy studios for this type of let, because studios, you're in direct competition with the hotel. That's not where you want to be. Ideally, you want to be 1, 2 bedroom properties, not 3, but 1, 2 bedroom properties, and that is where ideally you want to be for the short-term lets. And because it is an untouched market, you don't have that government intervention. There's far more tax benefits, which I would say speak to your accountant with. For example, a furnished holiday let can mitigate any headwinds and make owning and renting a property far more beneficial than a traditional residential. So if you've got a furnished let and there's wear and tear on the property, you can claim that wear and tear back. Whereas on a traditional residential property, you can't. So if you've got a furnished let, and again, you have to do certain things to meet that. It has to be allowed to be let for a certain period of time. What you want to do is speak to an advisor regarding that. But again, you can claim wear and tear on your property for a furnished let. The main concern everyone mentions when looking at these type of lets is the workload due to the constant turnover. But again, if you've got a good company in tow, then they will take care of that. Things like the laundry, the cleaning, the manipulation of the prices on the weekend. So for example, if you're an area which has football teams or events, what you want to do is make sure that when the fixtures get announced for example, Premier League fixtures or Champions League games, you want to make sure that you've got someone there or a company there that are taking care of that, and they're putting up the prices on those particular nights, because that's how you maximize your income. Our Skylet product does that. It takes away all the strain of managing the property, and it offers great returns. In some cases, you can double what you can get with a residential property. Now, that's a big difference. So if you're paying 2.5%, 3% on the mortgage, but actually you're getting 10% net in, then it makes buy-to-lets all the worthwhile. So traditional lettings versus Skylet. How does it work? Simply, we sign you up with the property, and from there it's up to us to source, let, and manage your property. What we typically say is you don't want hen do properties, you don't want stag do properties. Again, that will increase your lettings. You want to be near certain areas which you won't be, whether it be exhibition centres, conference centres, arenas, football grounds, things like that. Again, you can get city centres near the bars and places, but then you're going to attract a different type of clientele. A property renting for £800 per month, just 64 nights a year, 150 will actually attract the same yearly rate. So even if you only let it out for 2 months at £150 per night, you're going to get the same rate. Now, most Skylet will do well over sort of 60-65% mark. So again, there's far more potential. Downside is, of course, some months will be leaner than others. In some areas, November's a quiet month. In some areas, the summer's a quiet month. It just depends on the particular area that you buy that in. But using this method, as I say, you can comfortably double your returns that you can do on traditional letting property. Corporate clients, tourists, friends, relatives, any particular client can access that. So what next? Well, as we say, so the government has tried to regulate and tax the buy-to-let market. We have seen a slight dip in yields, but we haven't seen the dip in yields due to the taxation and the meddling from the government. We've actually just seen the dip in yields from the increase in the price of the property. Simple as that. Rents are still been increasing, but rents haven't been increasing at the same rate as the property prices. And although the stamp duty, a lot of people think this new stamp duty is a new thing. It's not. It's 3 years old, and still the market has ploughed on. The rules and regulations have made the market more efficient, in our opinion. It's removed the bad elements. But typically, what we say to people is think before you're about to take the plunge. What are the negatives of the investment? If you're investing in £350,000 properties, are there negatives with the type of client and the type of tenant that you're going to get in? If you're buying one £500,000 property, what's the negative? Well, it's going to be the expensive stamp duty that you're paying. Brexit, however, again, has left the country in a state of flux, not knowing what comes next. However, with the imminent Tory party leadership contest playing out, I've got a feeling that we are going to 100% be leaving on the 31st of October. I just don't think there's any other way. Typically, we've been saying this for a number of years now. I personally think that it's heading more towards a no deal. Everyone's prepping for that. So I think that we need to put a big sign on our window in terms of the country and say that we're open for business. And the only way to do that is by removing a lot of these stifling laws and legislation that come with that. And I don't think that they're going to start to add more legislation with Brexit around the corner. The government have been very indecisive, but again, that's been in the past. We now need to look forward and see what the new government is going to do. So in regards to you guys, questions and answers, you should have on the left-hand side either a speech bubble or a question mark, which you can ask any questions for. Got a few already. Right, I've got a question here. We've got someone else asking, what happens if I put all my properties that I've already purchased now into a limited company? Well, if you now put them into a limited company now, you would have to pay stamp duty on those properties again. So typically it's not that advantageous to then go and transfer all of your properties from your personal name over to a limited company. To have to pay another bunch of stamp duty, it probably won't work out. However, any future purchases, I would always say, look, speak to an accountant. They will know your personal income and outgoings far better than we will. So speak to an accountant and then just see what weighs up the most. I'm an overseas investor. I have a portfolio of about 4.5 million. What would you do? Would you sell, keep, or buy more? And the second part of that question is, how do you think stamp duty, or how do you think the UK will affect stamp duty for overseas buyers? Well, look, first of all, your portfolio is in a healthy condition. Personally, I still feel, again, without looking at your portfolio and knowing where it is and what you have, it's very difficult to say. Because, for example, if all your properties in London, I would say you may want to sort of ease out of that. If all your properties in the north, then I'd say maybe you can add to that. There's a big disparity. There's always been a big divide between the north and south of the UK, and the south always typically earning more money than the north, and the property market always outperforming the north. However, over the last couple of years, we've seen the north far outweigh the south. Actually, if we take London out of our national stats, the property prices are regularly going up quite dramatically. They're actually being weighed down by London. So when you see these doom and gloom reports, especially in certain papers here in the UK, of property prices, fallen again, or property prices static. Well, actually, that's typically that London has far more weight on the property market than the rest of the UK, pretty much put together. So what we say is take London out of that equation, and what you'll see is a totally different headline. So what we're saying to people now is actually you probably want to be looking outside of London, and also things like Skylet. In terms of short-term lettings, the Airbnb, Booking.com, Skylet, those kind of things, you want to be near arenas. So where is that in London? O2, expensive. Excel Centre, extremely expensive. The museums, again, expensive. Kensington, you don't want to be buying there. Whereas if you look at places like Manchester, where you can be close to Man City ground or Man United ground, you can get two-bed apartments there on the river for 220,000 front line. They're stunning. In Liverpool, on the river, next to the arena, again, stunning apartments, already built, returning 10% already. You can get those for 220 to 240 at the moment. So again, there's a lot of stunning apartments that you can get hold of. And so we would be looking further north. In regards to the question about stamp duty, no, as I mentioned in the webinar, I don't think that the UK will start to tax overseas nationals. I think that's a really bad idea to start. I think that people will stop investing. We need to be open for business, as I say, not closed for business. Next question. Is student accommodation a viable investment under the impending changes in regulations? Yes, it is. Different kind of student accommodation. You get different licenses. So you can have a residential license, which is what's typically called a C3 license. Now that is a residential license, but you can still let to student. You have student properties which are cluster apartments. That's, for example, 6 or 7 apartments surrounding one bathroom, or if they do have bathrooms, surrounding one kitchen. And then you have your own unique studios, which are you have your own kitchenette, you have your own bathroom in there. They're all viable investments. Just be careful what you pay for, because sometimes you have companies that are overcharging. They're charging £100,000 for a cluster apartment, which that shouldn't be the case. And then as soon as you get to the £100,000 mark, then you've got to start thinking, well, actually, I can get a residential property for this. So yes, they're still viable investments. You've got to get in the right areas. You want to get in the areas that have a lot of students there. You certainly don't want to be. I had a client come to me only last week. We have a couple of student properties. We have one particular one in Sheffield at the moment, which is extremely good. And he said it's between that or a property in Wales. The problem is the one in Sheffield has 65,000 students. The university in Wales has 15,000. So there's a lot less demand. So what we have to look at is, over the years, what's it going to be like? 5 years down the line, if you have something in Wales which doesn't have that much demand in 5 years because all the new ones are then built, is that going to cause a problem for resale? So all these things we take into consideration. However, yes, it's still a great investment student property. And don't forget, if it's a true student property, it's classed as commercial. So if it's classed as commercial, that simply means that you don't pay stamp duty on that as well. So they're stamp duty exempt. So you have advantages that way as well. Next question. In regard to Skylet, are there any guaranteed rentals? No, there aren't. There are no guaranteed rentals. But we do have a track record that we can show you. So, for example, the property that we have in Liverpool, they have a 10-year track record. So we can show you what they've done. We have figures from 2017 to 2018's figures, and they are going through a refurbishment, not this month, but at the end of this month. They will close down for refurbishment and start again. So we can show you what that track record is. And we can demonstrate this making over the 10% mark. But Skylet is for us is the way forward in terms of how to let your property. Is there any way of working out the short-term let hotspots? Is there a website which shows a short-term let demand for different areas? There isn't, unfortunately. It's a good question though. What we would typically say is, you want to be short-term lets. You've got to ask yourself, why are people going to visit that particular area for short-term lets? Short-term let areas, typically they won't have a car, more often than not all the time, but they won't have a car. So you've got to think of things like short-term lets, transportation, and why they want to be there. So for example, there's no point having a short-term let in a suburb. Typically it won't work. Short-term lets should be either by the coast, or should be by the city centre. Short-term lets, if they're by the coast, then of course you're going to be in the summer months, and short-term lets in the city centre, they're pretty much going to be all year round. So what we would say to that is, if you're going to be in the city centre, you need to be near attractions. So it doesn't matter what your market is. If your market is families with kids, couples, friends, you need to be near a certain area. So for example, the areas that we recommend where you've got either close to football grounds, close to arenas, close to exhibition centres, anything like that is absolutely spot on. Because what you get with that is you get something which is pretty consistent all year round. So for example, the one that we have in Liverpool, but even if you just do a Google search on the M&S Arena, it's the old Echo Arena, but it's now called the M&S Arena, you'll see what events there are. And pretty much every night or every other night, they've got an event. So when you had Disney on Ice up there, the whole block was filled with families. If you have boxing night there, again, it's full up with typically gents going to the boxing night. If you have the Grand National in Aintree, again, it was full up then. They even had the Labour conference in the exhibition centre there. Again, it was full up from there. So the most important thing is it's about the attractions that are nearby. So what I would say to the answer to that question is city centres, attractions nearby, or coastal areas where you have high demand for that kind of thing. Can we get a list of those particular areas? Again, look, we can do, but it typically changes. It will change obviously week to week, month to month on what our availability is in regards to those particular areas. So for example, I can tell you now anywhere around the Cornish coast is fantastic for those kind of short-term lets. We don't have anything just yet in regards to that. What we have now is, as I say, we have two opportunities now, one in Manchester, one in Liverpool, and they are both perfect for short-term let. They're absolutely spot on. They're fully residential apartments, but again, you can let them short-term. The key to it as well, guys, is make sure it allows you to do it. So for example, the one that we have in Liverpool, in the lease, it says, you know, you're allowed to do short-term lets, because a lot of people don't realize that they're advertising their property on Airbnb and they're actually breaking the terms of the lease. Most of the time, it's not really a major issue, but you ideally don't want to have to sort of go down that road at the start. Okay, guys. Well, look, I hope that's been helpful. Any questions, as I say, feel free to email in. We'll get an email out of the recording to this particular webinar. And if there's anything you need, feel free, and we'll go from there.